All right, so this is video 3 in chapter 8. This is about joint movements, and I'm glad to be doing this here. I guess I probably should turn my video on and get up and do this because it always is funny doing this in class because I've got to go through these motions and it looks pretty funny. Like when I'm watching students take the practical and they're going through this, and looks like students are going through a weird version of the Macarena as they're taking the test. So anyway, let's get started. Now, when we're looking at these movements, remember that these movements, although we're talking about these articulations and it's between bones, it is the skeletal muscle that's going to be providing these movements. So, in the next chapter, we're going to talk obviously about muscles and mainly about skeletal muscles. Now, I want to point out that when we're looking at these joint movements, think about what muscles might be involved in the specific ones we talk about. And we will see that in the next chapter, this is going to be a really big thing. Origin and insertion, so where the muscle starts and where it ends, I should say, and that's the wrong way to describe it. But I want to just kind of point out, for instance, if I again draw, this is my humerus, I'll put this down here, and then this is my ulna. I can't see the radius, but when I flex my elbow, right, when I go like this, what's happening is I've got a muscle. I'll change colors here. I've got a muscle called the bicep brachii. It is going to attach to the radial tuberosity. You'll learn that in lab. And when this muscle contracts and shortens, what's going to happen is, whoop, I drew those arrows the wrong way. It's going to be pulling towards the middle. Now, this muscle is going to contract, but it's not going to contract evenly. This side over here at where the elbow is going to be pulled up to this part here where the shoulder is. And so the shoulder does not move. The part of that that's attached to the shoulder doesn't move very much. So we call that the origin. And the part that moves, the one down here by the elbow, that is the insertion. So when we start looking at muscles in the next chapter, we're going to hit this pretty hard, that these joints are moved by muscles that will shorten, and one part of the muscle is going to be the thing pulled closer to the one other part. The part that doesn't move is called the origin. The part that moves is called the insertion. Now, I'm going to kind of skip through these. I'll read them, but the pictures are easier to see. So, but I am going to, kind of just make a point that in this, when we're looking at these movements, movements are generally going to be paired. Unfortunately, and like with everything else, the first section is going to have a different part to it. This pair also has a third type of movement. But you got to think about this. Any movement has to have an opposite movement, because if it doesn't, that means I move it one time and I never can bring it back. So, for instance, flexion, which is bending or decreasing the angle of a joint, has a counterpart called extension, which is straightening the part of the joint. Now, my elbow in general has a flexion extension movement. It stops generally about 180 degrees. Some people can go a little farther. Some people through injury can't. But flexion is going to end up being about 180 degrees, kind of like with the knee, same thing. Now, if I flex my elbow, that means I pull my fist closer to my shoulder. I flexed it. And extension is straighten it out. Now, most true flexion extension joints can only go to about 180 degrees or straight. But there is a few that can go a little past that as a normal part. The wrist, for example, if I'm looking at anatomical position, my palms are up. If I take my wrist and flex it like I'm throwing something, that is flexion. If I extend it back out to supination, that is extension. And I can go beyond that, and that is hyperextension. So flexion extension has a third one in some joints that we call hyperextension. Now, these other two, lateral flexion and abduction and adduction, are going to be easier seen on the pictures. But this abduction, again, I should circle, instead of that first part, circle this second letter, abduction. So abduction, something that is abducted, means it's taken away. abduction or adduction means something is being brought together. If I add something in, that means I pull it together. So this, starting at the last part, this is what they use for abduction and adduction, and my southernese kind of gets in the way, so I mispronounce it. Abduction versus adduction. So if I have this arrow moving this way, which means I'm moving my leg away from midline, that is abduction. If something's been abducted, it's taken away. Adduction is when I take my leg and I move it this way. We're going to see some muscles called adductor muscles. They are muscles that are going to be pulling your legs in. And again, if you go to the gym and you get into one of those machines where you have to put your legs way out and bring them together, they're generally facing the wall so that perverts don't watch people do that. But that is an abduction machine. I'm pulling my legs together. Lateral flexion, all right, just means I've got my little midline here, so I'm moving lateral, and it's at the waist or at the sides. That's lateral flexion. For straight flexion extension, I'm going to use the knee here and say that flexion is when I'm I'm decreasing the angle of the joint. So there it is here. Extension is where I am increasing the angle of a joint. So I'm straightening my leg. The next group of movements, and this kind of does frustrate me. I probably should have done something to get this, organize this a little better. Dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. This is about the ankle. Now the ankle is kind of an odd thing. So again, I'm not going to draw toes. So this is my foot. This part of my foot, the top part of my foot, is called the dorsum. The bottom part of my foot is called the plantar surface, or plantar. That's where there's a broad little ligament here that you can get plantar fasciitis. That's the pain at the bottom of the foot. But anyway, so if I take my toes and point them up, so I take my ankle and I'm kind of flexing my ankle upward, this is called dorsiflexion. The plantar surface, if I point my toes down or kind of straighten my leg out, my ankle out, that is plantar flexion. Now, the reason that this part up here, and again, we don't really go into it that much, but the reason that this part at the top is called the dorsiflexion or the dorsal surface, and most of us know dorsal means back, and it's one of those weird things of why is this called the dorsal or dorsum of the foot, and it is because in the hands and the foot, the palms of the hands and the soles of the foot are considered the front. They're considered the face. And so that makes this the back, and that's why it's like that. We'll look at the picture in a second. Circumduction versus rotation. This is if I have an axis of rotation. The difference between circumduction and rotation is circumduction is around it while never being on it, while rotation is circling around it while never leaving it. So if I take my arms and I don't move my arms, but I move my hands up and down, like around in a circle, put palms up, palms down, palms, that is rotation. But if I do circles, like those mean things from PE back in the day, that's circumduction. With rotation, you kind of see it mainly in the arm with medial and lateral rotation. Now, you can call this external and internal rotation, but you'll see that in a minute and see what we're looking at. And then the look of the hand, if I have hands palms up, that is supination. That is what we start with in anatomical position. If I look at and have my palms down, that is called prone. Now this comes from the idea that if I lay on my back, and again trying to draw kind of a weird picture here, all right, if I'm laying face up, this is called supine. And you can remember that if you're laying face up, you are laying on your spine. If I flip this and turn it and I'm laying face down, we call that prone. So in the hand, like I just talked about, the hand and the foot, the palm and the sole of the foot are considered the face. So if I'm looking at supine or prone as far as my palms being the face, if it's face up, it's supination with its base in the word supine. If I have my palms face down, that is pronation from the name for prone. So This is dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. So dorsiflexion is like I am walking on my heels. Plantar flexion is like I'm walking on my toes. This is showing those mean circles from PE, and so that is circumduction. Rotation would be like if my arm is sticking straight out there, and I could draw a little line from my driver rage finger into my glenoid cavity, and I rotated my arm around it and never left that axis of rotation. But you can kind of see it here. This is medial and lateral rotation. The axis of rotation is the humerus on this. And so the humerus never moves. I just move my antebrachial area, my lower arm, around that axis of rotation. If I bring my hand in, that is medial rotation, or sometimes called internal rotation. If I move my hand out, that is lateral rotation, or sometimes called external rotation. And again, the humerus in my brachial region, which is where the humerus is not moving. It's rotating. So that's where that comes from. In the hand, again, we have this idea of supination, palms up, pronation, palms down. Again, when I was in school, I had a professor that was kind of big into the idea. And I've heard it multiple times, so I know it's not just him. I'm sure it's a pretty common thing in schools that teach anatomy and physiology, to say that if you are begging for soup, I've got my hands out with my palms up, that it is supination, begging for soup. And again, it always struck me as a little bit weird, but I've never been so hungry that I had to beg for soup or food. I've been very blessed, and so I shouldn't joke about it, but to me it just seems like if I'm begging for soup, and I got my palms up, that's a problem. So anyway, I hope that helps make sense. But again, remember the key is that the name is about the palm, which is the face. Supine, prone, supination, pronation. Then we get to the last couple of them. Now this goes back to the ankle again. I kind of think if I was making these pictures, I would have the ankle and foot, the four ankle and foot type movements together so you can kind of see them, but that's just me. Inversion and eversion. So instead of looking at the foot and the ankle from the side, this is looking at the ankle from the anterior posterior view. I'm looking straight on. And so if I've got my ankle here, and again, this is my foot, all right, and there's my big toe is going to be right here. If I take and rotate my foot sole inward, that is called inversion. If I took and tried to rotate my foot where the sole is pointing outward, that is called eversion. If you've ever had an ankle sprain, you have pretty much almost always ankle sprains are going to be inversion ankle sprains. I step on something and my ankle rolls this way. So, and you can kind of see that if you try to do eversion, if you try to, even right now, just take your foot and point the sole of your foot out, it's very difficult. And it is because the fibula comes down a lot farther on the lateral side to give you some support. And just about 100% of the time, if you see an eversion ankle sprain, you're going to see a broken fibula. Bad news. All right. So anyway, protraction, retraction. On the picture we're going to see it uses the shoulders along with elevation, or the elevation depression uses the shoulders. The protraction, retraction uses the neck. Protraction, retraction usually gets a lot of laughs when I do this in class because I look like a turkey. I stick my chin out, called protraction. I pull my head and chin back in. That's retraction. Elevation, depression, shoulders raised up, shoulders lowered. So this is the inversion. Again, this is the most common way to have an ankle sprain. I step on something, I roll my ankle. Again, you can remember inversion, it is moving it in. Eversion is moving it out or away. You can remember that if you have an eversion to something, that means you don't like it and you try to push it away from you. Finally, the last couple, again, this is the chin. I'm sticking my neck and head forward, protraction. I pull it back, retraction. Now, I felt really old this several years ago, which means I'm even older, and probably many of you that are listening to this are going to see and be like my class that made me feel old. When you do you can use your mandible. I tried to show about, because we talked about those pterygoids, talk about muscles called pterygoids that are going to move your mandible, but you could stick your chin out, and that's protraction of your chin. You could stick your chin out, pull it back. And I made a joke about if I protracted my chin, it made me sound like Thurston Howell III. And the whole class that listened didn't know who Thurston Howell III was, which he's a character on Gilligan's Island, which is a great series, by the way. But anyway, that's just me and a little FYI. But I loved Gilligan's Island growing up, and it just made me feel very old that the whole entire class looked at me and said, "Who?" And nobody knew who Thurston Howell III was. So anyway, so then the very last we look at here, elevation and depression, and this uses the shoulders. I can pull my shoulders up, that's elevation. I can push them down, that's depression. But the way I like to look at it is going back to the mandible. If I take my mandible and I open it, whoop, that is called, or if I close it, that is called elevation, right? So I can elevate my mandible, and most people know that when professors lower their mandible, it can cause students to have depression. Sorry, I ruined the joke from the beginning. So anyway, I hope that helps you remember it. So these are just different movements. Again, they're really important to know. And definitely, if anybody's going into physical therapy, you're going to need to know a lot of these. But hope those all made sense, and have a great day.